And we're live. Hello and welcome to Fearless Flight Live, our weekly show. And this show, that's our crew edition with our lovely flight attendant, Diane. Hey, Diane.
Hi, everybody.
And our also equally handsome Captain Eric. Back in the studio. I'm not sure where you were the last time you were on, but it looked like you were somewhere underwater. I don't know if you were diving or not.
At my friend's house. Yeah, out in the sticks.
Iowa.
Yeah.
Well, either way, this is the show for you if you're afraid to fly, or if you know somebody that's afraid to fly, or if you're just interested in aviation. And we have a lot of aviation news updates for you today. And I'm gonna say, other than if you're not a member of the Birds of a Feather Facebook group, you definitely consider joining that. But we're gonna dive right into the Brazilian ATR crash. And what updates do you have for us, Captain Eric?
Well, I think you guys remember as we talked about that in as much detail as we could right after it happened. And if you're unfamiliar, that was the airplane was an ATR 72 operating from, I forget which town in Brazil, into Sao Paulo. And it encountered severe icing conditions. And ultimately, the airframe iced up to the point where the wing would not fly anymore. And the airplane, that's a picture of that airline and that airplane. And the airplane's stalled, which is what we say when the wing does not produce enough lift to fly. And it spun out of the bottom of the cloud. And there was cell phone video of it. And we're not going to show that to you because it's gruesome and tragic. But this airplane, as we had talked about previously, has had that model type some issues with its ability to fly in icing conditions, and it is approved for it. And I was going through the systems manual yesterday, and it has really one of the most mind-numbingly complicated setups for anti-icing and de-icing. It has combinations of electrically heated ports. You see that box below the pilot's window? Those are heated temperature and static ports. It has electrically heated front surfaces on the tail and what we call the elevator horns. The propeller is electrically heated, and that black strip going along the wing is a pneumatic boot that can be inflated from air directly from the engine to blow ice off when it is frozen onto the airplane. That being said, its tolerance for ice is not as much as other airplanes, and they took off from the departure airport and entered severe icing conditions at 17,000 feet. Part of the deal setting them up for this is that the one air cycle machine, or PAC as we abbreviate it in an acronym, which is used for air conditioning and pressurization, one of them was inoperative. And so the airplane was limited by regulation to a maximum altitude of 17,000 feet, which put it right smack in the middle of this severe ice. And they were taking headings and turns, as we say, delay vectors, to land in Sao Paulo in this icing condition. And they were operating those pneumatic boots and the icing equipment at intermittent times. But I will tell you from reading the operator's manual, the flight crew operations manual, which lines out procedures for this airplane, that entering severe ice is an emergency condition, so that everything else should take a back seat to dealing with it. And they needed to focus 100% of their attention on exiting those conditions immediately, even if it took declaring an emergency. They were in line and being worked for an approach with other aircraft. If they had declared an emergency, all the aircraft would have waited for them while air traffic control figured out where to put them and how to get them out of those conditions, be it a descent or a turn or whatever it took. And tragically, they did not do that. The captain was an experienced pilot with about 5,000 hours, but only 600 in that airplane. So it might have been, a captain for a year. The first officer, however, had 3,000 plus hours in that. So he'd been flying it for a long time and was familiar with the airplane. And their discussions off the voice recorder were, all they were doing was talking. The captain was briefing the instrument approach they were about to shoot, the arrival, going over speeds, that kind of thing in the arrival, as if it was a normal day. And only one time in that conversation did the first officer mention icing, even though they had electronic indications and warnings that they were in this heavy icing condition and the airframe was icing. And they also have a little L-shaped piece of metal outside the windshield that they can look at, which we call a representative surface, and they could look right on that and see that they were accumulating ice. So they had both just that plain physical indication and multiple electronic indications that they were in the heavy/severe ice, and that should have been 100% of their focus to deal with that, and tragically it was not. And the end result is they were there, remained in those conditions long enough that the airplane could no longer fly, and that's the end result. And we probably will never know why they did not discuss that, or
That is a question that just popped up. If that is so critical, how come? Well, all we can do is speculate really at this point.
Yeah. We'll likely never know why they didn't deem that to be of paramount importance and have discussions between themselves. Then apparently the discussions were just about a normal arrival, like it was a normal day and walk in the park, and clearly it was not. It was enough ice to defeat the airplane, and it did.
Eric, I have a question. Because this occurred in South America, of course it was in the US, it'd be the NTSB doing the investigation. What agency in South America does the investigation for an accident such as this?
Well, that's a fabulous question, and they have their own investigators, but I don't know who they are.
Okay.
However, they highly likely will request the help of the US NTSB and the UN, and because they're on very good terms, and the US NTSB will highly likely give them whatever aid, investigative aid they can lend.
And another question, if it were in the US and the NTSB was doing the investigation, because the thing that you both talked about is why they were not focused on that. Mm-hmm. Will one of the objects of their questions and inquiry be the pilots and first officers' personalities, whether or not they were likely to listen to one another? I mean, I'm kind of looking at the personality aspect of perhaps why they didn't. Back in the day, with CR, crew resource management, that was certainly an issue, and that. I just have heard of it, but the notion that those two individuals didn't do what would seem to be common sense, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and that will be looked. There'll be a very strong focus on that with both the pilots and both the pilots' background. But oddly enough, evidently they were communicating. They were talking back and forth. Nobody was ignoring the other person, but what they were communicating about was approach procedures, courses, and radio frequencies and speeds they were going to use and all that kind of stuff, just like it was a nice day and they were going to go shoot an approach in a fog.
Yeah.
And this just unbelievably came up only once, as brought up by the first officer, and I don't recall if there was any or what the captain's response was to it.
Hmm.
But this,
But in either case, it wasn't like a dire, emergency kind of way it was brought up. It was more like of a,
It was a calm tone of voice as opposed to,
yeah,
so.
interesting.
Wow.
yeah, and it'd be, hey, Captain, comma, we are in severe icing conditions. We need to exit now, and we can worry about all the other stuff later,
Right.
Mhm.
and or declare an emergency now and worry about the other stuff later.
Would, even though the captain, the first officer had so many hours in that aircraft,
Mhm.
is it possible that neither one of them had a lot of experience with flying in icing conditions?
I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know down south, but they're right close in the Tropic of Capricorn and
Yeah.
between the equator there. They're famous for heavy weather,
yeah,
thunderstorm activity and that kind of stuff every day, all
Yeah.
day.
yeah.
Mhm.
I would think they both had plenty of hard weather flying experience.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, many times it comes back down to human error or human oversight. And that may or may not be a case of that, but I'm sure they will learn from that in whatever ways. I know that, we often say that, these accidents help ultimately make aviation safer.
Okay.
One curiosity, I've read of a couple of smaller that may be just a fringe thing, because these planes are not actually used commercially currently in the US, right? Or are they?
Well, see, both A and B are partially correct. Yes, they are, but only for freight. And after a 1984 crash in Roselawn, Indiana, American Eagle / Simmons Airlines 4184, that was the no pun intended death knell for that type of airplane for passenger carrying in the United States. And so sometimes for freight, but it's unique enough that when I see one, I go, oh, look, there's an ATR, because I don't see them very often.
Well, partially I'm asking because I think there's a regional airline in Canada that's gonna provide or looking to provide service somewhere down east, as we call it, so between Halifax and Moncton, New Brunswick or something like that. And since you brought up the whole icing thing with those ATRs, and it's, I guess the perception now might be that this is an unsafe aircraft to fly when it's cold, but that's not really the case, is it?
I can say the without being politically correct, but honest, that it is certified for flight into known icing conditions. But I can say in all honesty that it is not as capable as other turboprops of its weight, speed, and class of dealing with ice and carrying it. And there are other airplanes that we used to jokingly refer to back in the freight days or general aviation. We go, man, that thing's a good ice wagon, meaning it can carry ice to the point where you can hardly recognize the wing, and it can still fly. So there's airplanes that are tougher, meteorologically speaking, than the ATR in ice.
Are there other aircrafts that have the same boot set up to remove ice from the leading edge of the wing?
Well, piston twins, yes, and turboprops, almost all of them, which is what that was.
Right.
And when I say turboprop, that's an airplane with propellers being driven by a jet engine. And all of the airplanes in that weight and class have that same setup where they're using hot air from the engines, as we call it, bleed air, hot bleed air from the engines to inflate those. Those are pneumatic boots or
Yeah.
just boots as we call them.
Right.
And they almost all work that way.
Yeah,
Mm,
interesting.
okay.
Okay.
Oh, Diane, I have a message for you. Gary says, tell Diane I'll bring her sweater to Air Hollywood, which is a perfect
Hey,
segue for
Gary.
2 reasons.
I'll see you in a month.
Yes, so that's a great
I'll need a
segue.
sweatshirt. Because just on a very side note, I said to the boys that I saw something on Facebook that we finally here in Phoenix broke a record of 113 days of temperatures over 100. And today the high in Phoenix was a balmy 93. Balmy 93.
Oh, there you go.
And that's without the wind chill.
Sweatshirt. Just saying, so I'll need the sweatshirt.
Yeah, and
Cold.
I'll have my hoodie on the show soon, Gary. Thanks. It's awesome. Just right there for the temps.
Are you guys telling me that the temperatures are plummeting over there?
Yeah, plummeting. I'm glad you worked that in.
But
We haven't been able to work in the word plummet in a
for a
long time.
while.
Awesome,
for a
Peter.
while.
That was 2 thumbs up. That was great.
So Gary mentioned it, Air Hollywood. That is the segue here on
Perfect.
October 25th, which is a Friday. We're gonna have what I would think is the most unique Fear of Flying class that you probably can get anywhere on the planet. And that is at an aviation themed movie studio, where we graciously can set up shop in one of the mock-ups there at that movie studio called Air Hollywood. And we invite you in to come in for an evening and learn from Captain Ron, Captain Eric, and Flight Attendant Diane, as well as a few of our alumni. So October 25th, if you are anywhere or you can get to the Los Angeles area for that experience, I would highly recommend it. And then on Friday, Saturday, October 26th, we're actually flying from Burbank to Sacramento, was it right?
Yes.
Okay, Burbank, Sacramento and back. And that's the second segue. Gary is a great example of showing up to the class, getting really fired up, and then not being able to fly because there's no tickets, or the tickets are just might as well fly to Italy on those
First class.
prices. Yes, first class on those prices. So what I'm trying to say, Eric, you checked the prices on Southwest. What were the tickets like?
Burbank to Sacramento was 104, and then our return flight was 122. So they're creeping up, but they're nowhere near out of control, but they're going one way, and that's up.
Yeah.
Which is a really good deal.
Really good, yeah.
And the whole experience, I will put the link in the chat in a moment, but we won't be using FOMO per se. But one thing that we can tell you is it is possible that may or may not be the last Air Hollywood flight class. Because next year at some point, I think February so far, may or may not happen in February. Southwest is changing their revenue model, meaning they are going to assign seats like we're used to with pretty much all other airlines. And so what that means is that we can't just all show up and sit together. So we haven't figured that out yet. We have some time, but for now, that is one of the best things that people report back to us. Being able to, board together as a group, sit together as a group on that flight. And Gary is asking, what are the flight numbers? Gary, I'll put the link in in chat afterwards, and if you scroll all the way down, it'll show you the flight numbers. Yeah, so
Gary,
that's yeah. Go
Oh,
ahead,
I'm,
Eric.
I'm sorry, Dieter. Without jumping you guys to our Gary, the departure out of Burbank going to Sacramento is at 1:30. And then the departure from Sacramento going back down to Burbank is at 4 p.m. So whichever flight numbers line up with that.
That's another way of doing it.
And the number going from Burbank to Sacramento is Southwest Flight 2769. And coming back from Sacramento back to Burbank, the flight number is 1548.
There you
All
go.
right, awesome. Well, thank you, Diane.
It's a team effort.
It's a team effort. So we do have some other aviation news. Is that correct, Eric?
Yes.
Yes.
And nobody.
Something about a tail, and it's not
Nope.
a lobster
It's
tail.
a tail of a tail.
It's a
Nobody-
Yeah,
The
go
only
on.
reason I'm laughing is because nobody got hurt.
Yeah, me
All
too.
right, then let me pull up that image.
Oh God, that's right. It's a tail of a tail.
All right, so let's share this. There we go. All right, so we're providing the real audio here. I just grabbed this screenshot.
Oh,
That's not a new aerodynamic design.
No. The best meme is Diane found. What happened here is what the picture shows. Although the airplanes aren't in the right position to scale, that's approximately where they were. And the A350 went by it. The big plane was an A350. They're both Delta airplanes. So my first thought was, well, that's what it's like to be a little brother. You're just going to get a beating when they can get away with it. But the best one on Facebook said that was an RJ900 that got hit. They're both Delta airplanes. And the best meme on Facebook said, lots of people don't know that the RJ900 can drop the tail when being chased by a predator. And the tail will often flop around on the ground, confusing the predator, and the airplane can regenerate it later, which is not true, but sounds good.
like a lizard. Like
Yeah. And my first thought really went to Diane, thinking about her sitting in the back of the airplane where she usually sits. And I'm like, whoever was sitting back there heard that. That's for sure. And if you look at the taxi diagram, those are the right taxiways. The RJ airplane was holding short of 8 right, and the A350 came down Echo. As far as I know so far, both airplanes were where they were cleared to be. And the ground controller had not instructed the A350 to hold short of that intersection. And I read the taxiway wingspan limitations till I went blind. And because some taxiways are limited to airplanes of certain size for obvious reasons now, and I couldn't find a limitation on Echo for an airplane of his wingspan.
So Eric, just so people understand, the smaller plane, the CRJ900, was in that position because it was getting ready to take off.
Yes.
Okay.
He was waiting to take off on that runway 8 right. And the interesting or contributing factor, he was holding short of 8 right where he was supposed to, but he was, well, I'm going to say well short, but he was also not snugged all the way up to the hold short line. He was somewhere between 40, 50 feet back of the hold short line. Now, there is so a bunch of controllers had weighed in on this, and I thought that to be the case. There is no regulation requiring airplanes to snug up to the hold short line unless so instructed. So he was completely in the right, being where he was, unless he was instructed to hold short tight on that line. And there's been quite a rash, as we've talked about on the show, of runway incursions and that sort of stuff. And so everybody operating's real jumpy about being an inch across any kind of hold short lines, anything else. So it kind of takes some stress off the pilot's mind if you can look out the window and see the hold short line and say, yeah, we're plenty good. We're in compliance with our clearance. And as I said, as far as I know, the A350 had not been instructed to hold short either. And it is not possible to see the wingtips on that thing. You have to know in advance when you see something come up, if it's marginal or not. And the great quote on this one was from Captain Jean-Luc Picard of Star Trek fame. And he said, sometimes everybody's right, but it still works out wrong, which may be the case here.
Yeah.
But I think that, and then there are
Oh,
lots of jokes about maintenance calling the crew and saying, stay there. We've told them, or the scheduling calling the crew and saying, stay there. We've told maintenance to have it fixed by 5 p.m. You can't go home. As little as I know about maintenance, which is not much, I'm guessing that airplane took enough airframe torsion that it's totaled and people will shortly be shaving themselves with it. I can't imagine that they can repair it.
and it's interesting that is, as Erica said, that's a CRJ 900 Canada regional jet. It's obviously made in Canada. And I have, not obviously in that aircraft, but I have flown that type of plane. I've worked on that type of plane, and it's a real, I love that plane. It's
extremely capable, very nice airplane.
It's kind of a long, skinny plane, longer than the 700 that I fly. This particular aircraft has 2 lavatories. It's really pretty spacious inside. It's a really nice plane. And to see it trashed like that, it kind of broke my heart. I'm like, oh my God. And as Eric said, I virtually always, at this point now, I always fly aft. I fly in the back of whatever aircraft I happen to be in, which is always the 700. And I can only imagine the flight attendant back there all of a sudden going, good Lord, what just happened? So, yeah.
Hey, Dieter, put that picture up one more time. I hadn't thought of it. That illustrates what I was talking about. The one you just had up.
Okay. The wide shot of it, right?
With all the emergency vehicles.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the foreground of that picture are the 3 emergency vehicles where the big red bars are that say 8 right, 2 6 left.
Oh, right.
They're parked on. They're just short of the hold short line. It's still forward in the picture, not visible. Right, barely on the other side of those vehicles. So that's how short of the hold short line he was, at least before he got swacked.
So he looked like he was pretty close to it.
He's fairly close to it. I mean, there was room for him to snug up tighter, but he was not so instructed.
Right.
So he was.
Those look like police cars. Those look like police vehicles.
They look pretty official.
Yeah, they do. What is Eric? What is the big vehicle with is that another emergency vehicle? It's probably a firefighting truck.
The green guy?
Yeah, that's a firefighting
truck. Fire truck, and that's
a fire truck
there in case any sort of
right
fluids come out, so he can spray it downward.
Foam it down. Yeah. Oh yeah, somebody's head's gonna roll.
And I thought those were passengers, that they're all official guys out on the ground. The passengers, they could have made a little bubble over the head going, does this mean I'm going to miss my connection?
Well,
I do feel sorry for the flight attendants at that point, because those are the questions they're going to get. And where's my luggage? And am I going to get a voucher?
Yeah, voucher.
Am I going to get a voucher for this? Oh,
well, speaking of connections and vouchers, if you cannot make it to Los Angeles on October 25th, we also offer a live stream of that class because it's such a unique location. So we're gonna get a tour of the studios, which is always exciting. Actually, it's really exciting for us because it'll be a different studio than we were at last year.
Mhm.
So no matter where you are, as long as you have internet, you can join us for that experience. And I have already put the link in chat as well. And one more thing to mention, and that is coming up this Thursday, and an encore presentation of also live this Saturday, and that's, we're calling it Breaking the Cycle: Effective Methods to Tackle Flight Anxiety. And this is really one of those webinars where hold on, there's a question coming in. I think it's regarding the virtual. So I'll come back to our group coaching. So the question is, what can I expect during virtual class from a flying? How it can help a nervous flyer? Well, so Abiram, I think Abiram. Hope I pronounce your name well enough. So from a flying perspective, well, it'll look to you, the viewer, as if the class is taught inside of an aircraft. So what is that class? This class, you get a recording as well. We're teaching the people that will fly with us on the Saturday, the next day, all the things that they need to know, so that they can confidently step on to that plane on Saturday. And I think we said it's at 1 o'clock, right? Saturday around 1 o'clock or something like that.
Yeah.
So all that detailed information can be found in the material after you registered. But as far as attending the virtual class, one, how many of you have ever been in an aviation movie studio? So there's lots of aviation paraphernalia, which Captain Ron, Captain Eric, and Talat, the owner, will be talking about. And it's all part of what we call exposure therapy, even if it's virtual, right? I mean, when you are just watching us, we're in this fake studio. Dan, you're sitting in a real room. We're Eric and I are in our fake studios. So you actually get much more of a sense of being on the plane with the other participants. If all works out, we have actually a couple of cameras, so we give you different angles throughout that experience as well. So I would highly recommend it, because even if you can't make it, you have the recording. You can use that recording whenever you fly next, and you rewatch it before you get on your flight. So that would be why it might be a great idea to actually attend virtually, even if you cannot attend live. Yes, Michelle has been to Air Hollywood. One of I wasn't the first one, but I think that was 2017, wasn't it, Michelle? That's when there was still a Costco close by, I think.
I've been to that Costco several times.
Yes.
Bringing back sandwiches and stuff.
Right. This is our third location, and none of us have been to this location yet.
Yeah. It's going to be very exciting. It is. It is.
Yeah.
And it's just, and we reiterate it, but this is the most. I've been doing this for years with Ron. It's so exciting. It's so realistic. You will forget that you're in a movie studio. You really will. And it's just as close as you can get to the real thing. Well, you can see it's just, although I'm crashed. I'm not in that picture. I must have been, I was probably.
You were probably at Costco.
I was probably Very good. That's probably where I was buying lunch. It's just the most exciting and realistic opportunity that pilots, Ron and Eric and a flight attendant, me, can show you of what it's like without actually being in the air. And you've got this fabulous time to ask any question that you want to or need to.
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
I know, Michelle. That's why I did my darndest to come up with that picture as fast as I could, because Michelle actually came
There you go.
came back as a volunteer. So this class was 2019, I think, or maybe 2018. And so this was our panel of alumni, and I had the great pleasure actually sitting right next to Michelle and Jim Duke on the flight to Sacramento. So absolutely a great time and an unforgettable experience. And another thing that is a really amazing experience, and that is our monthly group coaching webinars, which are really focused on the pain in your brain is not about the plane. So we're really diving into the more psychological aspects of your fear of flying. And there are different topics every month that we are diving deep onto. And like I said, for this month on Thursday and on Saturday, we're focusing on breaking the cycle. So what effective methods can you use depending on where you're at, what your triggers are, and whether you are more mechanical or emotional fearful flyer. And if you don't know yet what that is, then I highly recommend you join, because that is one of the, I'm gonna say, first things to learn about yourself, so that you actually know how you can help yourself effectively. We do have one more little thing, correct, Eric? We have.
Yeah, I can talk about it quickly if anybody had questions. Were any of you guys see that Alaska Airline had rejected a takeoff in Nashville last Thursday?
Yeah, we got a question about that one.
Okay, good. So this is a picture of the airplane, and they were on the runway, starting their takeoff roll, and that's another case where both airplanes were cleared, were doing what they were supposed to be doing. Southwest had got cleared to cross that runway at the far opposite end. But you can only, one of the bigger rules is you can only have one airplane on a runway at a time. And the Alaska Airlines airplane was going pretty fast on the runway. In fact, the speed I heard was 130 knots, which is very fast. And he saw the Southwest guys entering the runway, and he rightly rejected the takeoff. The airplane has an automatic braking feature called RTO that we arm before we take off in case we have to reject the takeoff. And it can apply a level of braking and speed of application far above any person. And when the RTO was armed, if the pilot slams the throttles to idle in the middle of the takeoff roll at or above a speed of 85 knots, the RTO feature will activate and apply absolutely maximum anti-skid braking to all the wheels. And it is brutal stop. Depending on the model of airplane, it will also automatically extend the ground spoilers, and the pilots always back that up and check it, but the ground spoilers will extend to help pin the airplane to the runway so it can decelerate as fast as possible And the pilots during the initial part of that are trying to pry themselves off of the glare shield because the stop is so intense. So I don't know what the distance was, but it was not close. And he stopped well short of where Southwest was. But this is showing a picture of him on the ramp. And what's happened there is the tires on the right side anyway have deflated. And they probably did not deflate or blow during the rejection, but what happens is so much heat energy is built up by the brakes when that maneuver occurs from stopping the airplane with all that weight, that the heat gets dissipated out to the tires, and the tires have what's called fusible plugs in them. When the pressure gets great enough, those plugs open and deflate the tires to keep them from exploding. And I strongly suspect that heat dissipation from the maneuver caused the fusible plugs to pop and the tires to deflate. But at any rate, everybody was safe. We'll find out why that happened, why both airplanes were on the runway at once. The other thought that went through my mind was, even though you get a clearance, it's kind of like stepping off the curb. When the walk light is on, you take a look, and our practice, and I can't remember if it was a hard and fast procedure or a practice, but when we lined up to take off, we would generally be taxiing. We could be taxiing with the taxi light on or off. But once we got on the runway, we'd have our strobes and all the position lights on. And then when we got a takeoff clearance, we would turn on all the forward lights so that any airplane looking down the runway at us going, oh, okay, here they come. If they looked down the runway and saw the airplane sitting there with a taxi light on, they go, okay, they're waiting to go. But if they saw all the forward lights on, they'd go, here they come. And even in the noonday sun with all those forward lights on, if you were by the runway and looked down there, it'd be real obvious. So I don't know if they looked or saw it or they had any commentary about that or not. We'll find out. But anyway, the Alaska boys did this maneuver fine, and the company's going to buy some new tires, and there's some people there that might not make their connection. Other than that, nobody got hurt.
I know, and let me just throw in a plug naturally for the flight attendants back there, that when we do our sweep, that's what we call it. When you see the flight attendants marching up and down the aisle at the very beginning during boarding, and when we, make the announcements, one of the flight attendants or the automated briefing system gives an announcement about the boarding door being closed and so on. And we're walking up and down doing the sweep. We are making sure that everybody's seatbelt is bought. We have something that's called the Bs. The bins have to be closed. The briefings have to be given, the emergency exit briefing and such. The seatbelts have to be on, and all the bags have to be stowed. And when we're doing that, we are double, triple, quadruple checking to make sure everybody is seated with their seatbelt securely fastened around low and tight. That's important. Low and tight around your hips, and all of your bags are underneath the seat. And so, as Erica has described, this aircraft came to the most, I can't even imagine it. I mean, I've been on a plane that's come to a pretty screeching stop, but not even in the same planetary system as this aircraft experienced. But if your seatbelt wasn't securely fastened, little kids can slip underneath them, big people can go forward. There are times in flight that we call them the critical phases of flight, the very beginning and the very end. And so we are not being miserable. It's not a power trip for a flight attendant to go around and say, please tighten your seatbelt or whatever the situation is. We're doing it because of the 9 million bazillion occurrences where nothing happens. Something like this may happen. And so we are always, we're hoping for the best, but a flight attendant's expectation is to plan for the worst. So please, please, please don't give your flight attendants a hard time when they're giving you those kinds of instructions. I'm not there to pour you a Coke. I am there to save your life. So.
And it's good you brought that up, Dan. The last thing I'll bring up, since we're a shade over, is when that happens, the flight attendants will be the first to recover their marbles in the back. And once the pilots pry themselves off the glare shield, the first thing the captain is going to do is reach back there, if he can get back there from the glare shield, and grab the PA and say, "Flight attendants, remain seated." And he'll do that because the flight attendants are going, well, we didn't do this because somebody forgot their contact lenses at the hotel. And the first question in their mind is, are we going to evacuate?
Right,
Or are we going to stay?
right,
Because they're going to evacuate, they're going to explode out of their seats and start with the evacuation. And that's the last thing the pilots want to happen if everything is fine.
right.
So the second they get the airplane hauled down, they're going to pick up the PA and say, "Flight attendants, remain seated." Then they know they don't have to bail out of the airplane.
Right. And that's part, just another real quick thing. That's another part when we start a flight, a trip, a 3-day trip, a leg, whatever, of the briefing between the pilots and the flight attendants. And that is, if there's an aborted takeoff, if there's an emergency, the pilots will say, the captain, it's always the captain doing the briefing, give us a minute to get organized, whatever, and then we will let you know. So we can't be bothering the guys and gals up in the flight deck because they're a little busy taking care of what they need to take care of. But we know as soon as they're finished with that, as Eric said, they'll pick up the interphone and let us know what's going to happen, whether it's an emergency evacuation, expedited deplaning. Are we going back to the gate? Are we not going back to the gate? So, yeah.
So I have a question that came with that incident, or at least somebody forwarded the video to us, and the question was simply, is that a consequence of the ATC being too overworked, too overloaded, too many flights, too many, like how everything has intensified quite quickly after COVID. Airlines are coping with pilot shortages, crew shortages, maintenance shortages. Are these the little cracks, so to speak, that happen when a system is stretched to the max? That was pretty much how eloquent that question was framed, actually.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say probably, but probably, because both those airplanes were cleared onto that stretch of pavement. And as I said, that's a no-no, only one at a time. And so both airplanes, from my understanding, had received the clearance. Southwest had a clearance to cross, and Alaska had already received the takeoff clearance and was honking down the runway at a pretty good rate of speed. So that will obviously come out, but it sure sounds like in that case that's what happened. They both got a clearance, and so one of them was in a space where they should have been, even though they were cleared to be there. Another,
the importance, again, even that it did come to this kind of like close call, and I'm sure all the people on the plane would agree it was definitely abrupt and unintended.
They know that.
Yeah.
But again, everyone was safe. The checks and balances, ultimately everybody did what they were trained and prepared to do. And
that word training is to me the crux of it, is all of the training that Captain Eric has gone through, all of the decades that he's been flying, that for our fearful flyers, you have to understand these guys and gals, they get trained and have to go through recurrent and get tested on such a regular basis that you're, as I always say to my passengers, you're safer with us at 35,000 feet doing 450 miles an hour than you are on the freeway, because no one is testing all of the reflexes and the knowledge of the drivers around you in a car. But Eric has been tested and tested and tested and tested into oblivion. So yeah.
And yet, during your many thousands of takeoffs and landings, nothing like that ever happened, right?
We had to shut down an engine one time
Mhm.
of an older 7.3
No, I
because
meant where there was another aircraft.
rejected takeoff and because of somebody else in the runway.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty funny. We were talking about that. I don't even have a friend's brother's cousin who knows a guy who's done it, but one of my buddy's wives who remain unnamed, who's a flight attendant, has been to like 7 of them or 8 of them, and we call her the Dark Princess of Maintenance. And she goes, "I hear you guys talking about me," and one time my buddy goes, "Hey, my wife's gonna fly with you to Hawaii." I said, "No, she's not. I'm not gonna fly across the Rio Grande with her. I'm calling in sick. She can go with somebody else. You out of your mind?" Yeah, she's some kind of statistical anomaly. She's been through a ton of those, but I don't know anybody who's high speed rejected like that. Incredible.
And I've never done that, but in my short 5 years of flying, I did have, and I think I talked about this probably a couple years ago, a go round. We were getting ready to leave, and I'm pretty sure that about 2 or 3 tiny bits of tire touched the runway, and all of a sudden we powered back up and we went around because, as Erica said, only one vehicle, so to speak, can be on the runway at any given time. And there, apparently, we found out later, there was a maintenance and ops truck at the very far end of the runway that was crossing and would have been off the runway by the time we got there. But because it had a couple wheels on the runway when we were coming down, we couldn't land. And as it turned out, the driver of the ops truck, his radio had died. And so the tower was trying to talk to him to get him off, and he couldn't hear it. So we were just getting ready to land, and all of a sudden it went up, boom, and I thought, well, that was interesting. And so we took a short scenic tour of Grand Junction, Colorado, and then eventually landed. So it happens.
I just drove through there recently. It's a pretty place.
Oh, it's beautiful. It really is pretty.
All right. Well, thank you both for your time and your wisdom. I know I learned something new every time, and I know there's a lot of people that are tuned in that appreciate your expertise. We, again, this Thursday have our monthly group coaching call, so register for it. I'll put the link in the chat, and we'll otherwise we'll see you next week, Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific again.
And I'll see some of you guys Thursday if you're on for the Thursday night thing. Otherwise, I'll see you Tuesday. And think over that 301, because we're when Southwest goes to reserve seating, I don't know what we'll figure out, but we're a little bit like the Coyote in the Roadrunner cartoon, and we're going to think of something.
We'll think of something.
We just don't know exactly what we're going to think of yet, whether it involves roller skates or explosives or however it's going to work, but we'll think of something.
All right. Well, thank you, Diane. Thank you, Eric.
You guys.
Good night, everybody.